It's been quite some time since I've come online and told a story, but today is a very special day because today is the birthday of my buffalo skin drum, Wa Chi Ka Chla, carrier of the sacred sound. And I made this drum exactly a year ago. Today is the 12th of February, and it was on the 12th of February 2025 that I made this drum. 12 hours it took me. And 12 is a number that will come up in the story today. So, this story I'm going to tell you comes from the land where I actually made my drum. Now, the skin of my drum comes from a ranch in Montana, but the drum itself was made in the Andes, in the Colombian Andes, in a town called La Vega. And while we were staying there, every day I could see this incredible mountain, a very large hill, small mountain, but it was a mountain called Mt Butulu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry if I'm not. But Mt Butulu. And Mt Butulu is the guardian of the lands around La Vega, and it's a very prominent, very visible, very particular mountain. It's got a unique shape, and you can really see it standing over the land as a guardian. And near that mountain there is a lake called Laguna Del Tabacal, or the Lake of Tobacco. And we also went to that lake. It's a very sacred lake, and we went there and held ceremony and had quite an intense but magical time making a herbal or plant-based medicinal spray, all in ceremony right above the lake. And this story I'm about to tell you actually comes from the land, and I've sourced it online. It is it's been told in various forms through local Colombian storytellers online. You can find it on YouTube. I'll drop a link to those sources in my YouTube. But to have discovered these stories at the time where I'm celebrating the birth of my drum feels quite special, and I still feel very connected to the land of Colombia. It's something very powerful there that really has awoken another aspect of myself. And I had 2 trips there last year, and they were both very powerful, and the connection I have to the land is incredible, not just in Colombia but in many places. Anyway, I digress. I'm here to tell a story in honor of my drum and in honor of the land from which the story comes. Are you ready? A long, long, long time ago, before you and I were born, many thousands of years ago, there was a valley, and the Rio Ila, the river Ila, rushed down the mountains and through this valley, bringing a great torrent of water, but it made the lands very fertile and it fed the wetlands in the area. And it was good land for the local people, the local tribes, and they made their home, they made shelter, they made good living. And the people of this area were called the Panche, and they were really fierce warriors, very brave and very strong. And amongst those warriors, there was one in particular who was the strongest and the bravest, and he won every battle that he fought. And he soon became to have a strong reputation amongst all the people of his land, except for there was one who did not honor him. And this man had once been a healer, had once been a very important and powerful person in the tribe, but his heart had grown cold, and his power, for he was a shaman, he was a magic worker, he had lost his balance and he'd lost his way, and he began to become envious of the great warrior. And over time, the bitterness in his heart grew stronger and stronger, to the point that he could no longer tolerate having this great warrior in his own village. And so one night, when a storm was raging and the thunder people were sending lightning into the sky and great claps of thunder, that was a night that many hummingbirds were born, but it was a great storm. And in the darkness of that storm, the shaman, who really had become a sorcerer by this point, cast a spell on the great warrior and turned him into a tigrello or an ocelot, or some say even a jaguar. And now this warrior found himself trapped in the body of a cat, of a great feline. And he looked at his once strong arms, and now where his hands had been holding his spear, he just had claws, and he could feel his face, and he had great long whiskers coming out of his cheeks, and he could feel his ears, and they were made of fur. And he looked at his body, and it had become all spotted and all fur, and he let out a great roar into the night that even the villagers could hear over the roar of the river, the roar of the the storm itself. And so this great beast was howling and roaring through the night and into the day and into the days beyond, so much so that the people became afraid, because they did not know what this giant beast would now do. This angry, strong, powerful beast, this great cat-like warrior that did not know what to do with his essence. Now he was in a different form. And soon the people became so afraid they could not leave their houses. They left their fields for fear that they would be attacked by this beast. And soon people were beginning to go hungry and crops were failing in the fields, all because of this act of the sorcerer. But one person in the village had the foresight to make offerings to the great moon goddess. And the moon goddess shone her light onto this beast. And she could see, as she shone her beam onto him, that his heart was still pure. His heart was still that of a great warrior, and she could see the pain that he was in. And so she took pity on him and called to her sister, the goddess of the forest, to help soothe and settle this great warrior beast, to calm his anger so the people would no longer be afraid. And so she worked together with her sister, the goddess of the forest, and slowly they began to cover this great feline beast with the heart of a warrior. They began to cover him with moss and stone and trees and grass. And because of his size, it took many nights for this work to complete. But in the process, the great beast, the great warrior, was lulled finally into a long, soft sleep. And that is how his body became merged with the land. And that is how Mount Butulu was formed. He was formed out of this giant cat, this giant beast with the heart of a warrior. And so the people rejoiced, and they came out of their huts and they began to tend to their land again. And the river was rushing, and the river was rushing. However, the sun god, who had been watching everything that was taking place, could see that now the land and the people had a guardian. He realized that the water needed a guardian, and he looked at this beautiful lake that you can see from La Vega. And he saw that the waters there were unprotected. And so he decided that there should be a guardian spirit of the waters. The land had its guardian spirit now, but the waters did not yet have a guardian spirit. And so he scooped up some clay from the banks of the lake, and he started to roll it in his hands, and he shook his golden hair, and he shook and shook again, and lots of little flecks of gold entered into the clay, and soon the clay was mixed with gold, and he was rolling and rolling and rolling until he rolled out a whole serpent. And he put the serpent into the grass at the side of the lake for 2 mornings to soak up the dew. And then on the 3rd morning, he looked at his creation and he could see what a fine serpent it was. But he realized it lacked life force. It lacked its soul. And so again he called to his sister, the moon goddess, who asked, "What is it you want, my brother?" And he said, "We need to bring this snake to life. Help me breathe life into this snake." And then the moon goddess said, "We need a golden hair." And she went back to the Mount Butulu, and plucked a strand of golden hair, the golden hair of the ocelot, the golden hair of the warrior, and placed it inside the hollow of the snake her brother, the sun god, had made. And suddenly this snake began to move, it began to writhe, and it rose up, and the sun god plucked 2 green emeralds and placed them on the face of the serpent so it could see. And here was this golden-haired, green and shimmering serpent with emerald eyes that suddenly dived into the lake and down into the underwater tunnel that connected the lake with the lands and the wetlands below. And so the water had its guardian, the land had its guardian, and all was well in the lands around La Vega, until one day there was a chief of these lands, and he, a bit like the sorcerer, had become proud, had become desirous of such greatness. He wanted to be on the level of the gods themselves. Now, one day, he saw, as he was walking through his lands, he caught a glimpse of the gods themselves bathing in small pools in the side of the mountains. But they were small pools, not a great big pool fitting of the gods. And he thought, now, this is my chance. If I were to create a deep pool so that the gods can fully bathe themselves, I surely will be accepted into their realm. And so he called in 12 of his greatest warriors and his 12 strongest men. And he told them their job was to dig into the lake that we know was protected by the snake goddess, but it needed to be deeper. It wasn't deep enough. And he told them to start digging and digging and digging and digging. But all they had to dig with were the small clay bowls from the village and the flint tools used to build houses, cut trees. And these men toiled day and night, day and night. They made offerings themselves, the most beautiful gold offerings to the spirit of the lake. But the lake just didn't seem to get any deeper. And the women were watching the men, and they could see how tired they were becoming. So they came and decided perhaps the gods would be happy if they made the lake beautiful. So they began to tend to the plants and plant flowers and plant beautiful rushes. This lake, the Laguna del Tabacal, is very famous for its floating island. And it was the floating island created by the women who were planting these reeds and rushes to make the lake beautiful. And again, the goddess of the night could see the efforts that the chieftain's people were making to try to please him and the gods. And she cried so much, she was so moved by their efforts. She cried tears into the lake, and where her tears fell, beautiful lotus blossoms started to bloom. But still, the chief was not happy. All this beauty, he could see his strong men were exhausted by weeks now of labor. But then he ordered them, if they could not, in one more night, make the lake deeper, he would have them put to death. Now, the moon goddess heard this, and she was absolutely dismayed. So she called all her sisters, the goddess of the forests. All her sisters came down from the sky and into the lake, and they landed on the floating Isle of Rushes, and they began to dance. They began to dance under the stars, and such a beautiful dance it was. They danced down, 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 through the waters, through the silt, all the way down until there was no end. There was no end to this lake, no bottom at all. And so the gods now had their large and beautiful bottomless lake in which to bathe. And the warriors were saved. And what happened to the chief? Well, his people turned against him, for he was too proud, and he was banished from his lands. And a new chief came, and the people made the most beautiful offerings and threw them to the lake. And to this day, visitors, when they come to the Laguna del Tabacal, throw offerings for the beauty and the sacred powers that reside there. And this is my story in honor of my drum and in honor of the land in which it was birthed. Thank you for listening.